Shoppers have disappeared. Hotels stand vacant. Highways once bustling with freight are now eerily quiet. Something unseen, but undeniably powerful, is draining money out of entire U.S. states. It's not a war. It's not a recession. It's a Canadian boycott, and it's hitting with pinpoint precision. Could 6 U.S. states genuinely be pushed toward financial ruin because of Canada? That might sound like an exaggeration, but it's not. It's already underway. Tourism is vanishing, exports are crashing, and the hard data tells a chilling story. These 6 states are inching closer to economic distress than their officials dare to admit. Stay with us, because the next few minutes might completely shift the way you see your state's financial future. Number 6. Florida. Sunshine, palm trees, and bustling beaches, that's the postcard image. But peer a little closer, and you'll find ghostly hotel lobbies, shuttered beach rentals, and local communities anxiously holding their breath. Florida is more than a tourist magnet, it's a finely tuned economic engine, driven largely by visitors. And among those, no group contributes more than Canadians. Over 3 million of them visited last year, injecting hundreds of millions of US dollars into hot spots like Naples and Fort Lauderdale. But 2025 brought a dramatic shift. Flights from Canada have plummeted by over 70%, and bookings have evaporated. The usual wave of Canadian snowbirds? Nowhere to be found. Businesses that have long relied on this steady stream of income are hemorrhaging. In tourism-heavy counties, where budgets are built on visitor-driven taxes, local governments are bracing for harsh austerity. If this boycott continues, Florida could be staring down a financial crisis unlike anything it's faced since the Great Recession. Because when the tourists disappear, Florida's economy doesn't just stumble, it suffocates. Number 5. Arizona. Yes, the sunsets remain stunning and the deserts stretch endlessly, but a quieter crisis is taking root. RV parks are operating at half capacity, restaurants are closing early, and entire towns are wondering where everyone has gone. Arizona has long been a winter haven for Canadians. Nearly 1 million of them flood in each year not just for the sun, but to spend. From golf courses to seasonal rentals, local diners to private clinics, the Canadian dollar has been a lifeline. Last year alone, Canadian visitors pumped over $775 million into Arizona's economy. But this year, that lifeline is drying up. Canadian travel to Arizona has plummeted, with flights dropping more than 70% compared to last spring. And as the boycott gains traction, the decline isn't just noticeable, it's catastrophic. Here's the real concern. Arizona quietly built large portions of its economy around Canadian visitors. Now that those visitors aren't coming, the cracks are undeniable. In places like Yuma, Glendale, and Apache Junction, local businesses are experiencing their weakest spring seasons in over a decade. RV parks report less than half their usual occupancy. Clinics that cater to long-term Canadian snowbirds are cutting staff just to survive. But it's more than a dip in tourism, it's a ripple effect. No Canadians means no customers. That means layoffs, less tax revenue, and tighter city budgets. In a state where tourism and travel account for nearly 10% of the economy, even a temporary halt in Canadian spending could wipe out hundreds of millions in revenue. And in Arizona's rural counties, there's no safety net. Before we jump into the next state, do us a quick favor, tap that subscribe button. It's a small gesture that allows us to keep bringing you deep dive investigations like this one, shining light on issues most news outlets overlook. Trust us, you'll want to see what's next, because the coming states, they're in even deeper trouble. Back to Arizona, because there's another layer. This state is one of the fastest growing in the nation, but that growth is built on one thing: stability. If snowbirds stop migrating, real estate cools off, and businesses begin closing their doors, that momentum grinds to a halt. Smaller communities that rely on seasonal revenue are already seeing their tax bases evaporate. Tourism boards are in panic mode, trying to replace lost business, but so far, it's not working. And the most chilling sign? This may not be a temporary downturn. If the boycott drags into the winter season, Arizona could be facing its worst tourism crisis since the 2008 financial meltdown. And in a state that thrives on sunshine and snowbirds, this wouldn't just be seasonal pain, it would mark a structural collapse. Number 4. Michigan. Snow crunches underfoot. Factories buzz with the sound of production. At first glance, Michigan feels grounded, rooted in industry, steel, and old-fashioned grit. But beneath that hum lies a growing tremor, hesitation. The kind of hesitation that slows expansions, that empties border towns, that has entire sectors asking, is this just a glitch, or the start of something worse? Michigan isn't just next door to Canada, it's economically interlocked with it. The state exports more goods to Canada than to any other country, by a massive margin. We're talking about $27 billion in annual exports, much of it linked to the auto industry, agriculture, and raw materials. But in 2025, that lifeline is starting to fray. A rising boycott movement is sweeping across Canada, driven by political tensions, trade disputes, and nationalist rhetoric. Whatever the reason, the consequences are tangible. Cross-border trade is down more than 12% this year alone. And for Michigan, where over 180,000 jobs depend on Canadian business, that's a seismic shift. In towns like Sault Ste. Marie and Port Huron, where the Canadian dollar once flowed like a local currency, small business owners are reporting massive drops in foot traffic and revenue. Gift shops, gas stations, pharmacies, everyone's feeling the pinch. But it doesn't stop with retail. Canadian companies are rethinking their long-standing partnerships with Michigan suppliers. That means contracts delayed, projects cancelled, and hiring freezes across key industries. And nowhere is this more concerning than Detroit. The city's long, slow rebound has leaned heavily on trade with Canadian auto plants and tech firms. With those links faltering, Detroit's comeback is in jeopardy. Automakers are scrambling to rework their supply chains. But that's a painful, slow process. Michigan's economy runs on trust in open borders, reliable partnerships, and mutual investment. Right now, that trust is disintegrating. Factor in rising operational costs, labor shortages, and a still fragile housing market, and you're left with a state far more vulnerable than it appears. Look at Grand Rapids. Look at Lansing. Even in metro areas, manufacturers are voicing caution during earnings calls. Some report delays in Canadian parts. Others are shifting operations southward to mitigate risk. And the public is waking up to it. In northern Michigan, towns that rely on Canadian fishing and cottage tourism are seeing bookings nosedive, down nearly 40%. Marinas are empty. Rental homes sit idle. Even roadside gas stations are selling significantly less fuel. This is a slow-burn economic collapse. Not explosive. Not obvious. But real and expanding. So here's the question. If this Canadian pullback isn't temporary, but a long-term redirection, what's Michigan's plan? The truth? It may not have one. Number 3. Indiana. From the outside, Indiana looks like a classic Midwestern success story, hard-working towns, humming factories, and miles of steel rails. But scratch the surface, and you'll find a quiet vulnerability that few are willing to discuss. Here's the foundation of the problem. Canada is Indiana's largest international trading partner. Every year, nearly $12 billion worth of goods flows north from Indiana. Everything from automotive parts to pharmaceutical components, heavy machinery to raw steel. That trade supports tens of thousands of jobs across the state. But in 2025, that reliable lifeline is deteriorating. This Canadian boycott isn't just a rumor, it's become economic fact. Orders are being pulled. Export volumes are falling. And sector by sector, Indiana's economy is beginning to show strain. Before we break it all down, don't forget to hit subscribe. That's how we keep producing these deep dive stories, built on real data, not just headlines. And believe us, the next 2 states on this list? They're in even deeper trouble. Now back to Indiana, where manufacturing reigns supreme. 1 out of every 5 workers in the state is tied to the sector. That includes everything from car components and medical tech to aircraft parts and steel fabrication. A massive slice of these products is bound for Canadian markets. But in 2025, things change. Canadian buyers, particularly in Ontario and Quebec, are canceling orders, rerouting supply chains, and turning inward. Some are choosing European vendors. Others are shifting to domestic suppliers. And a growing number are simply avoiding American contracts altogether. Why? A mix of reasons: rising trade friction, political uncertainty, ballooning transportation costs, and an intensifying, "Buy Canadian" sentiment among Canadian consumers. But no matter the reason, the outcome is unmistakable: demand is shrinking. And in Indiana, when factories get fewer orders, they don't just slow production, they cut shifts. Workers laid off. Investments put on hold. In cities like Elkhart, Muncie, and Terre Haute, entire local economies orbit around 1 or 2 major employers, and when those plants slow down, everything feels the impact. Even minor disruptions in exports can ripple through with major consequences. Machine shops across Indiana are now reporting a rise in canceled orders. Medium-sized suppliers, once confident in their long-standing relationships with Canadian firms, are suddenly finding themselves dropped without warning. The data confirms the reality. Indiana's exports to Canada dropped more than 9% in Q1 of 2025. But it's not just about quantity, it's about value. High-profit goods are being swapped for lower-margin deals, cutting deep into wages, tax income, and already strained public budgets. Another layer complicates the situation. Indiana's deep reliance on agriculture, corn, soybeans, pork, makes it especially vulnerable. Canada ranks among the top 5 buyers of Indiana's farm goods. Yet now, those exports are beginning to stall. 2 major grain cooperatives in central Indiana have already reported noticeable declines in Canadian demand. Pork producers are trying to shift distribution toward Mexico, but the transition is expensive and risky. In a market this volatile, there's zero margin for mistakes. Local officials are getting anxious. Behind the scenes, state leaders have begun reaching out to Canadian trade partners in hopes of damage control. But trust takes time to rebuild, and right now, Canadian confidence isn't what it used to be. So, what happens if this drag continues? Number 2, Illinois. Chicago's skyline still glitters. The expressways remain packed. From a distance, Illinois seems like a rock-solid bastion of American commerce, built on finance, trade, agriculture, and industry. But zoom in, and the fractures become clear. When your top neighbor begins stepping away quietly, the impact is loud behind the scenes. Illinois doesn't just share a border with Canada. It shares a tightly knit economic relationship worth billions. In fact, over 25% of Illinois' total international trade goes north, totaling a staggering $16 billion. That figure is now slipping. And the dominoes are falling. Let's begin with manufacturing. Illinois produces a wide array of exports: industrial machinery, electronics, and packaged foods. These industries have long depended on Canadian buyers to keep orders flowing. Cities like Peoria, Rockford, and Decatur flourished under the weight of steady demand. But now? Those pipelines are drying up. A state report recently revealed a nearly 11% drop in exports headed to Canada this year alone. And this isn't just a quarterly slump, it's part of a broader shift. Canadian firms, citing unpredictable trade conditions and rising political tensions, are putting contracts on pause or canceling them outright. Others are renegotiating terms or shifting supply chains to U.S. states seen as more stable. And it's not just manufacturing taking the hit. Illinois' agricultural industry, second in corn production nationally and a major player in soybeans and meat, has felt a hard blow. Canada has traditionally imported massive volumes of feed, meat, and packaged goods. But as of this year, many Canadian distributors are turning elsewhere: Europe, South America, or even local Canadian sources. Food-related exports from Illinois to Canada have plummeted over 13%. Farmers in downstate Illinois are seeing their silos fuller than usual, while processing plants tweak schedules to match diminished demand. In Bloomington, Normal, and Quincy, freight companies report fewer shipments, and warehouses sit quieter than normal. Even the Port of Chicago, a key Canadian trade hub, has seen container shipments to Ontario and Quebec shrink noticeably this spring. But what's even more unsettling is the growing uncertainty. Businesses across Illinois are becoming hesitant. Expansion plans are being reevaluated. Hiring freezes are quietly spreading through trade-reliant industries. For small businesses, especially those built on long-standing Canadian relationships, layoffs have already begun. And while this might not look like a crash, it's something worse, a controlled collapse. Slow, quiet, persistent. Add to that the ongoing struggle with inflation, rising operational costs, and already tight municipal budgets, and the picture grows even grimmer. Cities like Springfield and East St. Louis are seeing tax revenues dip while expenses keep climbing. Number 1. Minnesota. The lakes still shimmer. The Minneapolis skyline still shines across the water. But underneath that calm, a storm is forming. Minnesota has long taken pride in its stable, diversified economy, powered by healthcare, technology, agriculture, and a dependable trade relationship with Canada. But now, that reliability is under stress, and the tremors are spreading fast, even to places no one expected. Here's what most don't realize: Canada is Minnesota's biggest international trade partner. In 2024, over $11 billion in goods were exchanged. From medical instruments and manufacturing tools to soybeans, wheat, and pork, a massive chunk of Minnesota's economy flowed north. But this year, those flows are slowing, and so is confidence. Several Canadian buyers are scaling back. Others are walking away. While no official statement has been made, experts are labeling it a silent boycott, a slow but deliberate economic distancing tied to political strain and growing public sentiment. Minnesota's manufacturing sector is on the front line. In cities like Rochester, St. Cloud, and Duluth, factory managers are reporting sluggish output and delayed orders. Some have begun scaling back employee hours or hitting pause on expansion projects. Smaller precision manufacturers, especially those supplying niche products to Canadian buyers, are under immense pressure. It's a crisis hiding in plain sight. Now, consider this. 1 in every 6 jobs in Minnesota is tied to global trade. Nearly 40% of that is with Canada. That means even a 10% dip in Canadian demand could trigger layoffs, halted investments, and serious financial strain. And that's exactly what's happening. Agricultural exports to Canada are down almost 9% this year. Unsold grain is piling up in elevators. Pork producers are scrambling to find new buyers, and often losing money doing so. For farmers already operating on razor-thin margins, this is a threat not just to profit, but to survival. Even Minnesota's transportation and logistics sectors are feeling the pinch. The Port of Duluth, which has long been a hub for grain and raw material shipments into Canada, is seeing fewer outbound loads. Cross-border trucking is lighter. Rail shipments are slowing. On the surface, everything might seem normal, but ask around in small towns, and you'll hear it. Why is it so quiet this season? Why are shifts getting cut? The warnings are subtle, but unmistakable. This isn't a sharp downturn. It's a slow bleed. Minnesota won't fall apart overnight. But if trade ties with Canada continue to deteriorate, the state could face something far more dangerous than a traditional recession, a silent recession. One that sneaks in quietly, undermines confidence, and dismantles local economies bit by bit before anyone realizes how deep the damage runs. If any of this caught you off guard, or if it feels eerily close to your community, now is the time to act. Like, share, and subscribe so we can continue shining light on the stories that too many overlook. The more you know, the more prepared you are. Because what's coming next may be closer than you think.